Hello, everyone. Dr. David Adler, President of the Australian Jewish Association here, and I'm delighted to introduce a very, very special guest, Aryeh Lightstone, who worked very closely with all the major initiatives which were undertaken under the Trump administration when David Freedman was ambassador to Israel. And without further ado, welcome Aryeh to the Australian Jewish Association. For the people who don't know you, could you let me know who is Aryeh Lightstone and what was your role when you were working in Israel for the embassy?
First of all, thank you so much. It's lovely to be able to see you. It's lovely to be with all of your guests. I remember distinctly running into you in Tel Aviv very early on in the Trump administration, where we were frankly considered just a bunch of people who spoke but didn't actually do. I'm pleased to tell you 5.5 years later that I was privileged and blessed to be part of a team that did indeed more than we spoke. And just a little bit about me, I grew up from a Jewish perspective, a fairly small town called Denver, Colorado. And it was in that small town that I realized that if you don't do something yourself, it's not going to get done. I saw that from my grandparents and from my parents, and sort of the initiative of everything is possible if you put your mind to it. And I thought that on a smaller scale, whether it's creating a minyan in a school that doesn't have one, or kosher food in a place that it doesn't exist. And then I ran into David Freedman, who was a friend and a mentor for years in Long Island, way before politics. And I met somebody who was strategic and a visionary, and somebody who when he set his mind to something, got stuff done. But almost everybody has a ceiling at some point in time. And when David was nominated to be President Trump's ambassador, he put in his first press release, he looks forward to working from his office in Jerusalem. And that received numerous giggles and throwaways, and who is this crazy guy who's got this job? And frankly, he had the last laugh. And it was my privilege and pleasure to be chosen as his chief of staff. Myself, my wife, and 4 children moved from New York to Israel to serve at our embassy originally in Tel Aviv, then ultimately moved to Jerusalem. And my job was to be his right hand. And sometimes that meant getting coffee, and sometimes that meant representing him to the prime minister of the state of Israel. And the two of us spent nearly every waking hour together for 4 years. And I will tell my great grandkids about the time that I got to spend with a legend of Jewish history, Ambassador David Freedman.
Well, it was certainly a historic time, Aryeh, and as you said, things were done. Can you run through what you think are the most important things that were done for the state of Israel, for the Jewish people, and of course the alignment consistent with the interests of the United States as well? What were the major things that you were involved in that were actually delivered?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I'll take your question in the way that it was phrased. These things were benefits for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel, but they were absolutely pro-United States of America policies, which is why the decisions were made. And there was a beauty in the fact that they were synergistic in their reactions. And if you can just list them briefly, it was when President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel on December 6th, 2017. It is my contention that that one decision triggered the entire unconventional Trump era foreign policy that saw enormous successes. Just to understand what that was like, if you remember the Middle East that President Trump inherited, Iran was marching inextricably towards a bomb with $100 billion in cash from the United States of America. ISIS had a caliphate that was the size of Ohio, which is a state in the United States and growing. Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, the whole thing was a complete and total mess. And that pivot began towards peace and prosperity when President Trump recognized Jerusalem December 6, 2017. That momentum continued, if you remember that historic day, May 14th, 2018, when Ambassador Freedman, on behalf of Donald Trump, opened up the United States Embassy in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. It continued with, we moved the ambassador's residence to Jerusalem. Secretary Pompeo and President Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty on the Golan Heights. On January 28, 2020, we put out the Peace to Prosperity plan, which was colloquially known in the media as the deal of the century. Later on, we participated in repatriating hundreds of thousands of Americans from across the world in the process of COVID and working with our allies like Australia and others. But a underreported or perhaps a non-reported story was the fact that we helped hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis who were in countries that they shouldn't have been in by all legal rights. But we, the United States of America, did what we do for our allies, and we helped them get home to their country, Israel. And then finally, on August 13th, 2020, in the depths of COVID, we orchestrated the phone call in between Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of UAE, the United Arab Emirates, Prime Minister Netanyahu, then the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and President Trump, the President of the United States, which kicked off the Abraham Accords, which culminated after 123 days with 5 peace and normalization agreements in between the State of Israel, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Kosovo, Sudan, and finally the Kingdom of Morocco, setting off a path of true peace breaking out throughout the Middle East. And all of this started on December 6, 2017, when President Trump recognized Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, or if you go back 1 year prior to that, December of 2016, when David Freedman told the world that he looks forward to working from his office in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel.
Well, what you guys did has had amazing repercussions around the world. I'm just going to share with you a relatively minor one, if I can find it. Here it is. This is in Australia. This is me being invited to a meeting with the UAE ambassador in Australia and presenting him with a book that compiles the writings of the Rebbe on the security of the land of Israel. Now,
wow,
that sort of thing downstream, as you say, you and many people involved would be unlikely unaware of the positive repercussions that you've had that just spread and spread and continue to spread. So Mazel Tov, congratulations. I think the Abraham Accords that you were involved in delivering is the greatest step forward in a generation in terms of certainly Middle East peace potentially. I mean, there's a long way to go, but it lays a platform. It's changed the direction. Is that a fair statement? Be modest.
Yeah, no, I'm saying it's even an understatement, if you will, because what we had done for the past 70 years, certainly 25 years, was to try the same thing over and over and over again. Yeah. And not only did it produce the same result, it produced worse results. It ingrained within people the feeling that there was no progress and no ability to succeed. And hope yields hope, and failure yields failure. And therefore, each successive failure that existed didn't make success around the corner. It made success that much further away. And when Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz and David Freedman and Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley, I mean, it's a litany of enormous heroes hired and chosen by President Donald Trump, led the policy of the United States of America vis-a-vis Israel and the entire Middle East, the success was enormous and incredibly meaningful. And the repercussions, you're correct, Middle East peace has not been resolved. But what we've done is create a question of when and not if, right? It used to be that, what could I not do? I'm never going to be able to be a brain surgeon, and I'm never going to be able to create peace in the Middle East. Well, we can rest assured that I will never be a brain surgeon. But I will tell you that your kids and grandkids will come to a Middle East where it is likely that they will be able to travel from Abu Dhabi to Israel, likely even using one passport and going directly in some form of visa-free way in the next 25 years, and maybe even sooner. It's truly exciting. And I would just point out for the Australians who love to come to Israel, Jewish and not, because of the Abraham Accords, your flights to Israel have become drastically shorter.
That's true.
Being able to strengthen the economic ties in between the two countries, it makes it closer, it makes it more feasible. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to shrink the world and strengthen good people with values.
Okay, just want to finish on 2 points. First point, President Biden recently visited Israel. What are your impressions of that visit?
Great question. You know, whenever the president comes anywhere, it matters. And maybe this makes me slightly less popular with my party, the Republican Party, but I root for our president to succeed everywhere he or she will go.
Sure.
For the following reason: when America wins, the rest of the world wins. When America wins, I win. Unfortunately, President Biden has not yielded many of the successes of my rooting for him. Maybe I have to root harder. But the fundamental lesson learned from David Freedman, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo is clarity yields results. And look, the president made a lot of decisions in the Middle East that were popular with some people and not popular with others. And he made other decisions that were popular with others and not with some. But he was clear about what he was doing and where we were acting on behalf of the United States of America. And that gave space for countries to be able to calculate with all of the information that they needed. President Biden showed up and he re-injected confusion into the region. He came and he said how excited he is about the Abraham Accords, and that's enormously fantastic. I cheer that on and I root that on. I think that's wonderful. And he flew direct to Saudi Arabia. It wasn't as big of a deal as they made it out to be. President Trump did the reverse trip 5 years ago, but I root for one step forward because it's better than a mile backwards. But when the language about Iran does not match the action, when the visiting of East Jerusalem and taking off the Israeli flag from the beast, which is the car that the president travels around in, that brings not only confusion, it brings daylight in between us and our allies. And that confusion will yield chaos. And that chaos, unfortunately, in the Middle East will oftentimes lead to death and destruction. We need clarity and we need efficiency in what we do as the United States of America. And President Biden did not bring that to the region, unfortunately.
Well, let me add one point, which I'm sure
Please.
you agree with, and that is when you speak of death and destruction, under the Trump administration, certain funding was reduced, consistent with the Taylor Force Act, that America didn't want to be giving money to people who were paying for terrorism. During the visit and immediately before, President Biden announced, I think, something north of $800 million of additional funding, 500 to the PA, 200 to UNRWA, okay, the 100 for health services. So that concerns us a great deal, that more money is going potentially to be misused, but that's our perspective.
It should concern all of us. It should concern everybody who cares about freedom and sanctity of life. That money will not go to preserve sanctity of life, and it will not go in order to create prosperity.
Aryeh, final point. You have recently published a book based on your experience in the US Embassy in Israel called Let My People Know, which I presume tells the story of your experience. I've only read the reviews and the summary. I haven't read the book, but I'll tell people how to order it. What motivated you, and roughly what does the book cover?
Well, as Let My People Know indicates, the Abraham Accords is an undersung story. And maybe that's because it happened under President Trump. Perhaps it happened under the depths of COVID. But there are numerous leaders, led again by President Trump and Jared Kushner, who decided that the past does not need to dictate the future. And instead of these leaders receiving the Nobel Prize, they were dismissed as low-hanging fruit. And when the world chooses not to celebrate people who choose peace over war, you wind up with Ukraine and Russia. You wind up with Iran. You wind up with China. When we don't speak clearly with moral clarity about what is good versus what is bad, you wind up with chaos and confusion. And the book, Let My People Know, obviously is a pun on Let My People Go,
Of course.
but it is to let my people, and my people are the Jewish people, my people are the American people, but frankly, my people are people anywhere who care about freedom. And people who care about freedom need to understand what the secret to success of the Abraham Accords were. And they weren't my success. I did not get elected president. That was President Trump. And I was not chosen by President Trump. That was David Freedman and Jared Kushner and so many others. They were the architects. I was a subcontractor. But as a subcontractor, I saw where every nail went and I saw where every board has to go. And Let My People Know is trying to explain to people who want to see a better future, what are the key recipes to success: clarity, conviction, stand with our allies, stand against our enemies, and also what it was like on the floor. You brought up your picture of giving the book to the UAE ambassador in Australia, and I was immediately touched. In my book, it tells about the first time an Emirati and an Israeli sat down together to negotiate on what their visas would be like. These aren't the leaders of the country. These are director generals. When they sat down together in Bahrain, in Morocco, in Sudan, and Kosovo, my story tells you about what peace in between people is like, not what peace on a piece of paper is like. And that peace in between people is going to change the Middle East. And I hope, not for the sake of the money that comes from the book, but from the sake of the fact that I think it will propagate peace throughout the Middle East and beyond. I hope people read the book. I hope people like the book, and I hope people carry the convictions that are in the book.
Well, look, thank you so much for your time, Aryeh. I hope that we can host you one day in Australia. And my final comment is Aryeh is a person worth supporting. He's done great work. To find out about it, his book, Let My People Know, is available on Amazon, and in Australia it's also available on Booktopia. Hatzlacha continuing, and may the foundations that you were involved in laying continue to build more and more. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you for having me.